Hey everybody, just want to wish you all a very happy holidays during this December season. Thank you for listening. Thank you for clicking, sharing, the whole 9 yards. As of this recording, we just hit 10,000 downloads, which is exceptional, very exciting. Thank you so much. Also want to extend a very hearty thank you to my patrons, which include Patrice Millette, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of the Elitist, Nerds Without Pants' Julian, Seth Sergil of the All In Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne, Pete Harney, and Games with Coffee. If you want to join these exceptional people, please do so by signing up at patreon.com/agamerlooks40. 2 tiers, a whole bunch of fun. And if that doesn't quite strike your fancy, ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Pod Thing and This Bean and whatever else are extremely important in pushing the show forward. Thanks again for listening. Happy holidays again. Let's jump into the episode. Do you remember your first video game? Of course you do. This is kind of a large chunk of this podcast is exactly that subject. Now, do you remember learning how to play that game? Being taught by somebody what A does or how to jump, or that hitting those 2 buttons together kind of makes Mario jump farther and higher, and how long you need to hit those buttons or hold them to get the desired effect. If you're like me, probably not. And why? Likely because our parents didn't know. This Nintendo thing was a foreign concept to them. They didn't grow up with this stuff. So how could they possibly help? I remember handing my dad the controller as I was trying to play Rad Racer for the first time, and him handing it back saying, "I'm sorry, son, I don't know how to do this." And sitting back down in the chair to watch me figure it out. And that's what we likely did, figure it out ourselves. But now many of us are parents. We know what A does and how to make Mario jump high. And we're stuck with a strange question. How do we introduce our kids to our favorite medium? And furthermore, how do we guide them in the journey? Meet Michael Williams. A few months ago, Michael signed up to my Patreon under the $10 tier and received the ability to executive produce an episode of this show. Essentially anything he wanted, I would do within reason. He pitched a few ideas, and we landed on this one. It seemed to fit the spirit of the show the most. The idea being, let's attempt to answer this brand new question that's most likely just popped up in the last 10 years in a decades-old medium. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, Michael and I, with the help of some gaming parents, go on a personal journey of discovery, learning, and occasionally stepping back and letting go. In episode 60, Kindergarten Co-op, the trials and triumphs of teaching kids about video games. So, Michael, thanks very much for joining me today for a conversation about kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, kids and the joys. And I'm almost saying it sarcastically, but there are lots of joys having kids and lots of struggles as well. But part of, I think at least, of raising kids, part of the joy of raising kids, in my opinion, is watching them grow and grow into things. My big thing with my son is, what are they into, right? Like, what's he going to get into? I don't know. What's he going to get into? Maybe it's most likely going to be something I hate. Like, I don't know, like rugby or something. I don't hate rugby, but so first, before we kind of get started on that, I'd love to hear more about you, and kind of how you got started with games as dad gamer. So kind of what's your brief history of video games?
Yeah, I'm right on the cusp of looking at 40 and soon to be looking back at it. I turned 40 in March of next year.
Nice.
My first memory, that what I can clearly recall, I'm gonna say it's Christmas '88, Christmas Eve, and that was the year that the NES landed in our family. I remember that Christmas Eve, my cousins got their NES, and I vividly remember seeing um, Super Mario Brothers, and then vividly being just like being disappointed when I knew it was leaving for the night because they were going home, and we got ours the next morning. Now I don't know if that was like clever, you know, hype marketing that our parents were
Sure.
doing or anything like
Yep.
that.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, to go from seeing it leave and then having the same thing, in our hands, I remember, that box opening and knowing exactly what it was from the night before and knowing that I wanted to play the game where the guy was jumping over the mushrooms. And, I think this idea comes from that because I must have been 5, at the oldest 6, and I never really remember struggling with the concepts of games. I never really remember not being able to learn how to do something. It was pretty much, it was something I picked up and played and never was really ever taught or knew how to do. But I mean, it's been one of the things that I've constantly done. I'm all the way up and now into like the Switch and PlayStation 5 generations and still going strong. And I still go back and enjoy, the games of my past, but I'm still active in the community playing stuff that comes out as recent as of 2 weeks ago, stuff like that.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And I think a lot of people our age had a very, very similar experience. I love the concept of the theater our parents went through for some of these gifts. When I got my Super Nintendo, it was the same year my brother got some like Micro Machines thing. And I remember my mom, and I have video of it, my mom and dad going, how did that appear? Like, I can't believe it's here. Okay, how did it get here? Like, who'd you rob? And it was so funny because now you think back, you're like, well, clearly you bought it. Of course you bought it, but they were playing it up, the theater of Christmas. I think that's really a fun memory. You mentioned a 5-year-old daughter. What's her name?
Madeline, or we just call her Maddie.
Maddie?
Or,
Okay, cool.
Or
That's a
any
cute name.
nickname that comes up with that. Her gamer tag is Maddie Ice right now. So
Maddie Ice. Oh boy,
yeah.
That's really good.
Yep.
So you kind of stated some of your kind of goals. You want to introduce her to more console gaming because she's interested. You're on the couch playing, and she's interested in what you're playing. So she says, "Hey, Daddy, I want to play." What is she currently playing now, if anything?
So that's a great question. What she likes to play, or the one that she likes the most, is Mario Kart 8. And
Gotcha.
I think here's the strangest thing. This is kind of where this idea comes from, is that for all it is said that Nintendo is a family company, they don't have dialogue in their games. Everything is written, or primarily written. So for a child who can't read, some of these games that I'm looking at that are saying E for everyone, where I'm just like, this should be really easy for her to figure out. The explanations of what's going on in those games aren't as straightforward as they should be. For you and I, it's like, oh, okay, we just move over here and we click this button and we hop there. I mean, she gets so frustrated so easily on some of these things, and it just kind of goes to this idea that I don't remember ever really being taught or ever giving up on the challenges of this stuff, and she'll just kind of move on. So Mario Kart 8 is the example that I will use where you can turn on all sorts of fun little settings, and on a 50cc race, if you just put your controller down, you'll get first place. The game will pretty much take over and assist. So it's kind of one of those games where I look at where she's able to think, like the perception of her playing is there, but there's a certain point where the training wheels have to be taken off. And as soon as we go in that direction, that's where things start to really get a little bit of a struggle. So another one that I will use an example of, like where we've hit the hurdle, is Pokemon. Let's Go Pokemon Pikachu, or Let's Go Pikachu. This is this is the most basic version of that game that you can play. We have the Pokeball controller, which is literally just a joystick and a throwing motion.
Cool.
And you go and I try to repeat that, but there's little menus that she still has to navigate through. So I have to sit there and kind of guide through. That's my co-op experience right now. Is I'm the person that sits there and goes, okay, we have to press this button, and now we have to press this. And the interesting thing is that she is kind of picking up the reading part of it for the simple stuff, but that's really where it kind of comes to, like, I don't remember ever having somebody sit next to me and being like, you have to press A here, or you have to press B, or you have to, this is how you do a fatality in, Mortal Kombat or something like that. This was just stuff that, like, you had to learn how to do. And it's a weird thing where, you try to talk about passing on your legacy. It's like, this is the thing that I've done for most of my life. And everyone's she's asking for all this help. And I'm like, at what point does the gaming gene kick in and just take over for her? And I feel like it will happen, but it's just, those are the kind of things that I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah. And I think that's very interesting. The piece of this where as kids, we didn't have to deal with this. Like, we didn't have to to your point, we weren't taught how to play Mario. We weren't taught how to play, as we were older, F-Zero. Like, no one explained these things, and they had manuals, but I remember most of the games I had, I never looked at the manual. I never consulted a manual. I just kind of picked it up and figured it out. And I think that's going to be a big key to this kind of little journey we're going to go on here. Whereas, how do we let kids, figure it out? I'll give you a quick anecdote. My son is trying to play. He's learning how to play. I always mess up the name. New Super Mario Wii U, the Mario game that's on the Switch, the basic side scrolling. There was the Mario Kart, Mario Brothers U, New Super Mario Brothers U, but now on the Switch.
Yes,
standards.
It's the 2D platformer one. We have tried that one as well.
Okay.
Yep. So.
And how'd it go for you?
Oh, well, so this is the thing. This is where I keep coming up with this, is like, there is the concept of moving left or right. That's fine.
Right.
There's the concept of jumping. That's fine.
Right.
There's the idea of running. That's fine. But once those three elements need to be put together, that's where it all goes sideways. That's where she can't even make it past, like, the first enemy on a stage, because it would require moving, jumping, and landing precisely all in one motion. And so then it basically just becomes, she tries that 2 or 3 times, she gets the death screen, starts over again, and eventually just hands off the controller and says, Dad, can you do this for me? So it's this idea where I'm like, I could sit here and play this entire game. You can watch the whole thing, but you obviously want to play. How do we communicate, like, this idea where you have to be able to move, jump, and go through that? How's your experience going with that?
Well, it's interesting. When I had kind of an interesting. I exposed him to games when he was about 5. It's probably the same as your daughter. And before that, he would watch me play, and he'd have like a controller that wasn't plugged in or turned on. He'd pretend he was playing with me. And he'd always say, "Oh, we played through Super Mario 64." I'm like, you didn't actually. I fooled you into thinking that. But I eventually said, he should start playing himself. So Mario Kart, that's another one for him. He loves it. The training wheels are off for him, which I think are great. And he can get by on 50cc just fine. He'll win a few, he'll lose a few. But his problem was always getting frustrated. And when he got frustrated, he'd get angry. Or you get angry if you told him to stop, because we put pretty strict limits on how much he can play. And so after a while, one day he grabbed the Switch and just threw it. Like, he threw it. And he threw it on the couch, so it wasn't no risk of damage. And to which I said, and this was probably I'll explain in a second. I obviously said to him in a moment of annoyance, I'm like, that's it. You're done with games for a while. Like, you're just done. Like, clearly you're getting too frustrated. You're throwing things. And he's like, how long? And I'm like, I don't know, until we tell you can play again. So we did about 5 months of him. And every once in a while he'd say, can I play games again? I'm like, well, I got to talk to your mom, And then I realized the error in that tactic, which was I didn't let him learn how to deal with the emotion. I just took away the stimulus for the emotion. And that's not okay. He had to learn what it meant to control himself and not throw things when he gets frustrated. So he's been back on games for about a month now. And before his hiatus from games, he was same thing as your daughter. He was just, he could barely get through the first stage, running, jumping. He's made it now to the second world, to the boss of the second world. It's just him practicing. And I every once in a while I sit with him and I'll say, Will, you got to learn how to run jump. I said, just practice your run jumping. Once you figure that out, this game unlocks and you'll understand, you'll be able to get through a lot of it. But he gets a lot of, he's still working on his run jumping. Every once in a while, I catch him playing the same level over and over again in the first world. And I go, Will, why are you here? He's like, I'm practicing my run jumping. I'm like, okay, son. All right, fine. Okay, I get it. But he's gotten there. And for me, it was letting him explore and fail and his persistence. Because if he wasn't going to be if he didn't want to do it, he would just stop doing it. And that may not be the kind of game for him. And so for me, it's really been learning what he's into. Maybe he's not a platforming kid. All right. Maybe he likes racing games and that's his thing. Okay. And being okay with that. So I think where we're at now is, and I think where you and your daughter are at is kind of this moment where she wants to do it because daddy does it, but she doesn't quite know how. How do we kind of marry those things together?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think another example, I don't know if you've ever tried to go back and let them play some of the older titles.
Oh, I tried. It was a failure. It was abject failure.
I mean, that NES Classic that came out a few years ago has got 30 really good, decent NES games on it, including the original Super Mario Brothers, and that's where I started. That's the first game that I could say, like, I remember playing and I remember accomplishing and moving forward through. And she probably set the speed record for hitting the death game over screen 3 times in a row, like just running into the same Goomba 3 times and then like game over and starting over. And I remember it was either my wife or someone was sitting there watching it with me and they go, is there anything easier? And I go, this is about as easy as it can be. This is the first, like this is 2 buttons and a D-pad. Like you don't get much, you don't get much easier than this. And
right.
I just never remember struggling with that. Like, right. I don't remember ever having the I've hit games where I've been like, whoa, this is too much. Like, I can't do this. Like, like something like it's not even really a game, but something like Flight Simulator is always something where I'm like, I wish I would, turn off all the pro modes, unlock all the difficulties and be able to know exactly what all these switches do. But I just don't have that. But it comes to this idea that like when I want to play, I will learn how to do it, and I'm just trying to guide her through that. And a lot of that is like I played a terrible game called Paw Patrol, which is, as a person who's played many games, this game runs at about somewhere between 25 and 30 frames per second, and is basically just a collectathon. It's just you line up the Paw Patrol member that is looking for these colored things, and you just collect them all in a stage. And that's about it. And I don't want to have to play that game, but she can't get through it and she loves it. So it's like, I'm sitting there going like, oh my gosh, this game runs terribly. There's so many better games out there. Right. Yeah. But strangely, like something like Odyssey, she can pick up. She understands how to like she gets the idea of throwing a cap, like the fact that the motion controls are there. But then again, it's like once it becomes something where she has to move through a platform or an enemy gets in her way, that whole process is like, what do I do? It's like she wants everyone in the game to be a friend, I'm like, most of the time that's not how this works. I'm like, it's predominantly there's someone out there. If you see something hopping around out there, it's probably not there to be your friend.
So here's what I think we should do. It is, as of this recording, it is September 26th, 2022. And what I was hoping we could do is over the next couple of months, kind of just almost work with our kids on playing games, right? And kind of setting some goals as to what we would like them to do. I think for you would be stop playing Paw Patrol, play Mario or something actually good.
Yeah.
And maybe defeat your first enemy. Right? That'd be a step. Hey, it feels really good to smoosh a Goomba.
Yep.
That sounds awesome. And then for mine, probably will be to get more independent on playing. In the meantime, over the next couple of months, I'm going to talk with some gaming pals that you've heard on the show and everyone's heard on the show before, gaming dads, gaming moms, and kind of say, how did you guys manage games with your kids? Like, how do you guys deal with it? And then maybe in a couple of months in December, we'll do another one of these, compare notes and see how we did. And hopefully within those couple of months, we learn a few things, not only about gaming with children, but about our kids themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
That's what I'm hoping to come across.
So that's what we did. Over the next 3 months, Michael and I intentionally began the process of weaning our kids away from the iPad and onto the controller. Every couple weeks, we'd check in to swap stories, see how things were progressing, etc. In the meantime, I reached out to some gaming parents I know for advice. Now, we did this between October through December of 2022, and that's a busy time for moms, dads, and caretakers. School, extracurricular activities, Halloween, Thanksgiving, etc. So it was a tough time getting people on the virtual phone. And that's from no fault of anybody, including me. I didn't reach out to as many people as I would have liked. But luckily, I was able to steal time from 3 awesome people. My first chat was with Dan of Retro Logic Podcast, and through our conversation, I was hit with a game-changing suggestion that changed the way I look at kid gaming forever.
And so when I handed him a controller for the first time, playing the original Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo Switch Online with the wireless little, square NES controller, I mean, he was awful at it. Like he did not understand. He did not. He could not make the brain hand screen connection that like, oh, if I press left, he's gonna run left. If I hit the A, he's gonna jump. Yeah. And there's momentum, and there's a B button, and if you hold that, he runs and goes further. He could not grasp any of that. And I mean, he died to that first Goomba 100 times and hated it. Oh, yeah. He was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I didn't want to shove it down his throat. So I was like, okay, it's fine. Why don't you just watch me play? And it's screen time. So he thought that was fun. And so, bit by bit, we found things that he really liked. And so, one of my biggest pieces of advice, I think, is Mario Kart 8. Mario Kart 8, you can basically turn their character into like auto run, right? You can turn on auto steering, right, auto accelerate, and all they do really is launch weapons, which, you and I both know that's the best part of Mario Kart is just throwing. Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
I'm in 12th place and I get all the good weapons. Well, great. Your child can do that.
Yep.
So that was kind of where we went next with Mario Kart 8. And that was a hit. I mean, he knew where his character was and it's racing. He couldn't fall off the track. He was just having a blast, right? And then very slowly, I would take away the advantages. First I took away auto accelerate, and that was like, hey, now you have to hold down this button the whole time, which was like, right, okay, why, whatever. But when I took off the auto steering, that was when things got really, he really got a taste for like real life then. It was like real, like, now you're swimming with the sharks. Falling off the edge and, learning how to drift. We're still working on drifting and braking and jumping. And Mario Kart is deceptively complex. And you only realize that when you try to teach a 7-year-old how to play Mario Kart, but if we want to just have fun, then I'll just put on auto steer and we can just have fun. And then we'll go into like education mode and I'll teach him some stuff. You got to mix it together, the fun with the interactive. And then actually tonight we were playing a bit of a game called Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time. So you either know what that is or you don't. It's an indie game that was on Steam and I think it's on every console now. It's very old, but it's genius. What it is it's a 4, 5, or 6 player co-op game where everybody is on board this spaceship that flies around the screen, right? And like, so there's kind of 2 things going on. There is the spaceship where you're jumping into a gun or a shield or navigation or the thruster, and everybody has a job. And so in the spaceship, you're jumping from job to job to try to steer and manage the spaceship. And then outside the spaceship is space. And there's all kinds of stuff happening outside the spaceship. And it's amazing because it's probably my favorite co-op game of all time, because you're yelling at each other like, go to the left gun. And he's like, you get on the shield. And we're like, we got to thrust this way. Like, then we go to navigation. We're like, where are we even going? And it's like you're on a real spaceship, because you can't just, your character has to get off of a job, run over to the next station, activate that station before it can like do anything. So there's like a time constraint on moving back and forth between jobs. So teaching him, and it's very simple, right? It's very simple to control. You press one button to jump off,
Sure.
and then another button to activate a station, and then your control stick to run around. So he gets all that. But the social dynamic of the co-op experience really got him hooked, because he'd be yelling at me like, Dad, get on the other gun. I'm like, I'm trying to steer. Like, we're yelling. It's an absolute blast. So it's very cartoony, child-friendly.
Yeah, it's cute. I'm looking at a couple stills right now.
And even it can also
really
just
cute.
get really really bloody. Like if you have a couple of adult friends come over and you play this, like you'll be cussing each other out by the end of the night. Like, you didn't do the shield right. Like, what are you doing? And it's oh man, everybody has a job.
Cool.
It's super fun.
I think that sounds really cool. And what I love about this is that a lot of what you've been able to do with kind of the structure you've built, and my family have a very similar structure. We have rules of when him. Well, really, my daughter doesn't really. She's 2 and she just turned 2.
We give my 2-year-old
Yeah.
an old broken Xbox controller, and he thinks he's playing Mario Kart, and he just loves it.
Yeah. He, my son played quote unquote games with me with an unplugged or GameCube wireless controller. Here.
Oh gosh, I don't know that I would give him anything I care about breaking.
Yeah, that's fair. Good point. That's a good point. Well, it's very different how the different kids are, right? Like my son, if you put him in front of a TV, he literally could sit there for 4 hours and watch it, unbothered. My daughter, she got like 20 minutes and she's done. She's gonna walk around. She can do something else. She's not as interested. So it's very interesting. But anyway, what I like about this is that you're incorporating games into family time, because especially with a game like this, which I just from the stills and your description of it seems very co-op and very just everyone working together, and it seems like a lot of fun. I'm definitely might have to pick this one up. It just sounds like it's an opportunity to spend time as a family and play as a family, which is kind of like the end goal, even for me. Right? I don't want it to be a completely solitary thing for him. I'd like it for him to be for kind of all of us when my daughter's old enough to enjoy it.
That's what we do. That's the goal. The goal is family time. And there's some games where he loves watching me play Splatoon because that's like colorful and fun, but he's not ready for that.
Playing games with my son should not have been a revelation. But that's not how I played as a kid. Like I said in the open, my parents were oblivious to video games. And since my brother is 5 years younger than I was 11 before he was in gaming phase. And anybody who knows me knows I am not an online gamer. At all. I like to say that the only thing that needs to know of my failures in gaming is the game over screen. That's it. Nobody else needs to see it. So to me, video games are and always have been a standalone solo hobby. So it was up to me to find something for us to play. We started with sharing a controller in Super Mario Wii U Deluxe, and that was fine. Worked okay. But the real success came in Shredder's Revenge. It fit like a glove. We could play at the same time in co-op. The controls were simple for Will to understand, and he was actually doing things in it. He was succeeding, destroying robots, and he contributed. I always defeated more foot soldiers by the end of the level, but he always registered points. It gave him a confidence and agency nothing had up till that point, aside from Mario Kart. And the two of us played through the entire game. Michael took a slightly different route. In mid-October, he bestowed upon Maddie her own Pikachu Yellow Switch Lite. The hope was to help her overcome obstacles by them playing side by side, her with a physical copy of his digital game. And around this time, I got in touch with gaming dads extraordinaire Jeff and Trevor of the New Dad Gaming Podcast, and we had a lot to say. To kind of give you some backstory, one of my patrons executive produced a show. And in doing so, he gave me a bunch of ideas. And one of them was he has kids my age, 6 and I think 5 and 6, a daughter who's I think 5 now. And she was playing a lot of like iPad games, kind of that sort of thing as you do when you're that age. And he was trying to get her to transition to console games, but she was having a hard time. So what I figured we would do is my son is in a similar boat. He's trying to play certain games. He's not very good. He's 6. Kind of get people's opinions and capture other parents and dads and moms' stories of how they interact with games with their kids, like how their kids' journey was and how they were able to help them along. And over the next 3 months, kind of using that advice, kind of just see where our kids end up. And then, mid-December at some point, we're going to reconvene and kind of a recap of, hey, how's it been for the 3 months after we've been intentionally trying to apply these different things that, people have mentioned. So I wanted to bring y'all in because y'all are, you guys are the new dad gaming guys. And you guys are very open about your kids and how they've been experiencing games, and the French horn, which I just think is wonderful. So
it's a lie. There's nothing wonderful about that instrument.
And you know what's weird about the French horn? It just looks stupid. It's
does.
A dumb looking thing.
It really does.
Big twisted donut pretzel looking thing. Anyway, so I guess the first question is, when did your kids first start getting interested into video games?
Yeah, so I think, as with many parents now, I think kids will at some point start touching tablets, and for us, we really liked the games that were kind of some puzzle solving stuff. So there's sliding puzzle pieces, like matching shapes, matching colors, trying to get in that type of thing. That was certainly his angle. The first actual console game that he picked up with his hands and started to play was Rocket League, of all things.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And it's sort of, what's great about it is there's kind of nothing to it. There's just a couple cars, especially if you're in, exhibition mode. A couple cars in a big match. There's a big ball. And the thing that got him hooked was that I would set up the ball in front of the net, and then he would just press the button and his car would go flying into it. Huge explosion. Our cars go flying. Huge music, crescendos as this big goal happens. And he would laugh and laugh. He thought it was the greatest. And then just very naturally, you saw the progression where, okay, now I'm going to, if I press this, I turn. I have kind of agency in this sort of 3D space. And then just slowly he picked it up. Next thing you know, he's kind of driving this car around. We're having matches. So I find it a bit of an interesting entry point, although as we've talked to fellow gaming dads, it actually seemed fairly common as kind of like a safe, fun, silly, very much a classic type of video game in the sense of you're a rocket-powered car playing soccer. And it's just accessible and that wonderful experience. So, Jeff, what do you remember what your first games were for your kids?
Well, yeah, besides tablet, because they were big into the Toka games. I don't know if you guys have played that, but Toka Hair Salon in the kitchen and all that stuff. But I had 2 very different experiences with my kids. So my oldest at the time the first game was Tearaway. And it was really just about the bright kind of construction paper look to it. And there's no real fail state to that game. You can run off a cliff and get hit by enemies, but there's no game over. And what kind of helped my oldest along in that game is that there was a second screen that the parent could be on. and you could actually sketch on your like smartphone or something that would connect to the game, and you sketch stuff and it would pop into the game. So if I sketched like a bird with his name on it, it would texture into the game at certain points when he runs by. So like he would see clouds that now have his name on it, and like snowflakes that would be my design with stuff that he likes. And it was just like that much of a hit. So it like really grabbed him. And again, like he wasn't completing the game or anything, but it was just running around in this kind of construction paper level, and it was doing it together. And I think that kind of helped his interest a little bit, just to get away from those, you know, basic iPad games and even like the clicker games. I think he was on those for a bit. But that was my oldest. My youngest at the time was very much into like environmental games, or what I call like atmosphere games. So like Abzu, which is just basically underwater swimming with fish.
Yeah.
Like that was something that totally allowed them to kind of get a feel for the 3D space, because it can be very disorienting, and much like Rocket League, right? Like you just want them to kind of get a feel for the buttons and movement. And that one, again, when you were just swimming around, seeing stuff, it was bright, colorful, very soothing. Like it almost put me to sleep. Like the soundtrack on that is like...
The soundtrack's great, yeah.
Yeah, it's like so zen, right? So it just like brings that energy level down, which is kind of maybe is something you want with a 5-6-year-old at the time. So that one was a good one for my youngest at the time. It was just something that was a little bit calming, a little bit zen. And, you know, it just gave him a playground to kind of play in. That was a hit for my youngest.
And that's interesting. You mentioned kind of exploring space. My son, he started out, he played a little bit of like Wildcrats, you know, like Wildcrats PBS games and things like that, Daniel Tiger on the iPad. But he was always kind of into it, but not too much. The first thing he gravitated towards was Mario Kart on the Switch. And he loves to drive. And I might have said this before, but early on, this was maybe a couple of years ago, and he was about 4, I would turn on all the easy stuff for him. You know, and I think I've told this story to you guys at some point. I'll just say it again for this here. I remember one time he was playing, and he's like, I gotta go potty. So he gets up and he runs to the bathroom. I'm like, all right, dude. I look up, but he had left the game running. Like the game was on, it was no pause menu. Right. And when he came back, he was still in 4th place. The game literally drives itself when you put like, you know, the adaptive steering. You can't fall off the car. You don't have to accelerate. And it's basically driving itself. But, you know, he really loves it. And then after time, you know, I would just go and I would take those things away. And then he'd be shocked why he's now falling off of the track every 5 minutes. But he really, really, really digs it. But now he's really getting into platformers.
Nice.
Problem is, he's not good at them. I know that sounds mean. He's going to get good at them, but he's really not. So it's teaching him to gauge his frustration. And actually, I've been meaning to send this to you guys, actually, because about 6 months ago, I sent in a thing about taking the games away because he was getting too frustrated. Basically saying to him like, "Hey man, I'm sorry, you can't. Yeah, you're getting too frustrated. You threw the switch. Like you need to like have a break." And he just got his games back maybe a month and a half ago. So it was like a 6-month thing.
Wow.
Because we kind of forgot about it and he didn't mention it. But every once in a while, he would say, "Hey, Daddy, can I play?" I'm like, "Oh no, I got to talk to your mom." And I realized that tactic, and this is just more kind of like an honesty thing, failed miserably. It did not work because what I realized was, me taking this thing away is not teaching him how to handle the emotion. He's just having emotion he doesn't know how to handle. So if I completely remove this thing that he likes, well, he's still getting pissed off when he gets the show taken away, turned off, or a movie turned off when he's not done with it, or whatever it is.
Right.
So he's since returned. He's since been given it back. I think a couple months now at this point. But so that's a little addendum. I've been meaning to send that to you guys because that little gambit of mine did not work. So, and since he's had it back, he's been much better. Like he gets frustrated, but then he goes like this. He shakes, and then he just does something else. He just plays something else. He doesn't deal with it. He just goes to something else, which is good. It's a good, healthy thing. Yeah. Did you ever have an issue with your kids with them getting overly frustrated with the game, or getting to that kind of little breaking point, when it came to a different title.
And I hate some of the lines I put, because it's one of those things as you become a parent where it's like, oh no, I've become my dad. This is something they would say. And they would get, so he'd start to get really frustrated and he'd start to lose his cool. And it's like, he's like, I can't do it. I'm like, well, I guess we have to turn it off. We can't do it. So I guess, we'll go, let's go outside. Let's go for a walk. It's like, and then immediately it's just like, no, we're going to fix it. I'm like, okay. So clearly there's a way to do it. And you're angry. And if this thing causes you anger and you get upset, that's not even right. If you let your anger get the best of you, then this thing isn't something that we can do. Right. So, I do like that you kind of came around to that. There's that coaching. Every moment of that is just something where you can coach, you can teach, you can bring them through it so they can start to process and understand how to get angry. So it's like you can totally be angry. I get angry at games still. You should see some of the nonsense I've had to see. I have in my play sessions, but working through it's like if you start to act like you really enjoy this thing, you love playing games, you wait for it all week. And if you get down here and you start to yell and you scream or you fight with your brother or, you have outbursts that are unacceptable, then you lose that thing. So we got to learn how to regulate and kind of work through this stuff so that you're going to be able to keep on it. So in many ways, I find it to be a really great teacher as far as, you're in the midst of something that you love. Absolutely. So you best find a way to regulate yourself. And again, to be clear, like, get angry. Being angry is fine. Angry is a perfectly fine emotion. But what you do with that anger is the important part. And that's where the coaching and the great lessons, I think, can come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll second that to Trevor, because like that happens with everything. Like even if you think of sports and stuff, like you have to be regulating your emotions if you're losing or have lost or becoming frustrated, right? So with my kids, there wasn't much of the outbursts by themselves, but if they played together, absolutely. Like it was like apocalypse, right? Like Smash Brothers, them against each other. That was just a recipe for disaster, right? So it was about trying to, lead with kindness between siblings at that point, and it was more of those kind of conversations. But again, it was a kind of a shot across the bow, like a warning, just like if that continues, then you guys can't play together. And that's not what you want, right? Because you want the game time, and the game time you can spend together beating a game or playing whatever. But again, if you can't be in the same room together and you're yelling at each other to stop and the other one won't stop, and it's that like sibling like rivalry kind of thing, or the oldest is beating up the youngest, but it's in Smash Brothers. So it's just we've had a lot of conversations about that. But another issue we kind of had, and I don't know if it goes hand in hand with again, both my kids are diagnosed with ADHD, so they get really sucked into a video game and getting those dopamine hits. Like they will, if they are trying and failing, they won't give up. They are going to go and get this thing done. So it was more of a conversation about when to put the game down, because, you have to eat, you have to go outside, you have to do other things. So, and a lot of the times they would get angry and mad and upset because the gaming time would end, right? So we had to kind of address that problem, regulate those emotions, and what can we do? Like, what tools can we use? Like, have them be part of the solution too. So we're very much in that kind of vein where they have to kind of come up with something and we can kind of talk about it. So they decided in that instance, they just need a 5-minute warning because they had no sense of time, right? So if we give them a 5-minute warning, they're kind of prepping themselves, right? And then they kind of came down. It wasn't perfect, but it did help them. And then they were part of that solution, right? So you kind of engaged them that way. And I think it ended up okay. I mean, we still have our hiccups even now, but who doesn't? Really? Like, we're not perfect.
Oh, listen, not totally. And I think the time limit's very interesting because we try to put pretty relatively strict time limits on screen time in general. And again, let me just preface this by saying when we get to kind of this part of the conversation, I don't consider this advice, people listening out there, because I don't know nearly enough about anything to give advice. I think every parent does the best they can with what they got. So if some parents give their kids more time or less time, hey, you do you in that realm, right? Because when it comes to that sort of advice thing, I think it gets to a little bit of a gray area where I don't want people thinking I have all the answers or you guys have all the answers.
Right.
This is more about sharing stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
probably should have prefaced before, but with Scrums to Screen Time, he can play games on Tuesday nights, Friday nights, and then Saturday and Sunday. And usually it's 1 hour Tuesday nights and then an hour Friday night, and then Saturday and Sunday he can do 2. That's just kind of, and it's his choice when he wants to take that time. We often let him go over that time because we're usually doing something like cleaning. The children are still. One is napping and the other one is still. And we can finally, I don't know, somehow clean up the mess that's evolved into our home. But that's something that's been helpful. And also being loose with the 2 has been helpful as well. We had an issue early on where, when an hour came, that was it. Game over, turn it off. And that was causing a lot of friction because he might be in the middle of a race or something. Right. So now it's like, hey, bud, you got 5 minutes, like you said, Jeff. And then, all right, it's 5 minutes. When these lives are gone or when you finish this level, then you got to turn it off.
Yeah.
All right. And that's worked a lot better because you've set that parameter and they're now prepared for it, like you were saying, Jeff. So that's something that's worked for us as well in that realm for sure.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's going to prompt them to be better and better at games. Because they'll be in something like Fortnite, for instance, and it's like, all right, as soon as this Fortnite match is done, then we're going out. Yeah. But then they're like, they're dragging it out. They're like they're number 1 in the entire heap. So instead of like a 5-minute match, it turns into a 45. It's like, oh, you little so just like
little so and so.
Yeah, so the better I get, the longer I can play because I can just drag it out. He said until I died, and if I just never die, it means I can play forever. Hello, loophole.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like us with playing games together, do you guys find yourself playing games with your kids more, or is it more for your kids more of a solitary thing? And I'm sure that has to do with age. I'm sure that changes as the kids grow older. They want to be more independent. Yeah,
it should be a pretty good contrast because Jeff does have the older kids.
Yeah,
But that it certainly is one of the greatest moments for a gaming dad when the kid comes and asks, like, "Can you come play with me?" Like single tear rolls down your cheek, like, yes, I can.
Oh yeah, my heart got 2 sizes too big. Yeah, totally.
But so at this point, we tend to only have games. We were very much in the same situation with you, just around setting boundaries and making sure that gaming was a positive force, and we ended up getting rid of it during the week. And then what worked in our household was on a weekend only thing. But he lives for those weekend sessions. And even leading up to the week, he's kind of planning it out. Like, okay, perhaps like when we wake up, we can do this. Can you play with me? Can we play this together? And it's just like stunning. And that's taken 2 tactics recently. One is where we do play a game together. So we'll play Gang Beasts. We'll play a Lego game. We'll play not even Rocket League. Boomerang Fu, Rubber Bandits is another one. Just a whole bunch of games. Like we'll be running around and playing. Another one, though, has been like he recently picked up, for instance, Phoenix
Rising.
Phoenix Rising, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's been he's playing that alone, and that like it's a 1-player game, but he wants me there with him, and then we're kind of working through everything together. So, okay, but then, so son, if you just jump over there, why don't you go get that crest there? He's asking, how do I get past this? And we sort of troubleshoot together about it. So there has been some shift where they wanted to play a bit. They have quickly, we started playing a whole bunch of stuff together, and that's still very much the moment we're in, which is awesome and fantastic. Cool. I think the biggest one is my youngest, who's 5, has also gotten into Minecraft. So the greatest joy that I have at the moment is where all 3 of us will join into the same Minecraft server. So it's just the 3 of us like stomping around these wild worlds that my sons have built. So they'll play it together. They build a bunch of stuff. They invite me in, and they do this like tour of, hey, Dad, come check out everything we've built in Minecraft. So it's all 3 of us like playing together. But I'm starting to see the transition into he's playing by himself, and then I'm sort of turning into coach as opposed to player. But I'd be curious on Jeff's kind of transition from, because again, like he has the older kids. So Jeff, are your kids now leave me alone, I want to play my game? Or does Dad still get invited?
I would just say, guys, just hold on to those moments. Cherish them. Yes, my 12-year-old and 9-year-old are kind of, they're more on their own. So my 12-year-old is doing like competitive Minecraft Skyblock, I think it's called, which is like this, again, server that's dedicated to meeting up with his friends and going through, PvP stuff. So he's up like yelling away on his laptop with his friends and stuff. And my 9-year-old is kind of doing his own thing in Minecraft, much to kind of the same thing with Trevor, building and sharing with friends. So they're kind of off on their own. The only kind of time where they want to play together is if it's something that I kind of make time for, or if there's a cool game that they want to see. So we talked on the show, like I went through Elden Ring, and they're kind of old enough to, again, no judgment or anything, but they're old enough to see that stuff. So they actually helped me along in the game, and we're looking up on Google, like the builds I can get and the weapons I can get and where I should go. So that is kind of our game time, where it's more like they're helping me and want to kind of see me succeed. So it's almost like I've switched places. You could do it, Dad.
So if my son eventually wants to, in that vein, right, wants to see me succeed, hey, Dad, let me help you out. Maybe we can look it up together. Is that like akin to me becoming old and decrepit and like can't walk? I can be pretty sure my son will help me up the stairs and spoon feed me things.
That's right.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I just need someone. Just somebody. I mean,
you'll be the one frustrated on not beating a level and be like, okay, Dad, let me help you out.
Just relax her, Dad. We don't want to get the nurses all upset now. Come on, take it easy.
No, see, my frustrations at that point will be with my inability to gum a sandwich or something. That's where I'm going to end up. That's going to be my anger point. Just cursed turkey and provolone. Yeah, man. I think it's interesting how it's all kind of articulating. And I think the biggest takeaway from me personally was, and I think we can say this with anything kid related, is intentionality. Mm-hmm. Like really not letting it just happen, but trying to be intentional in how this hobby develops with a kid. Because as I've said 100 times on different places, I'd much rather my kid play an hour of Mario Kart or Legend of Zelda or anything really, rather than watch some dumb thing on Disney Plus, like some show. So the point of it is just try to be intentional, like saying, okay, we're going to intentionally do this as a family. We're going to intentionally control time, but not be dictators of time and let you complete things. So that's, I think, for us has been very useful. And I'm assuming the same has been for you too. Yeah,
like the knowing approach. I mean, what's been great being a father who grew himself up with games, yes. Like where, we were kind of joking before. It's like, okay, well, wait until your next life. Well, this is MMO. I'll never die. But like having that inside track as far as like what these games are, what the latest games are, what to look out for as far as like microtransactions and other things, the pitfalls of gaming, what is age appropriate for the kids, right? So having firstly just a sense of the landscape of what they're into and what they're going and what they're doing, but also just participating in the hobby. So, show me what you built in Minecraft, like walk me through it. Oh, that's really cool. Did you ever consider, XYZ? I can't figure out how to beat this Mario level. Well, what have you tried? Could you come at it from a different approach? There's all these great opportunities for life lessons and bonding if you are part of it and you're within the conversation. It's not so much, oh, you like gaming, fine, here's some gaming stuff and a timer for 3 hours, like
right.
Thumbs up. And if instead like there's that like, there's not an overbearingness to how you're approaching them, but there is an interest and an involvement and a genuine kind of curiosity to see like how they're getting and what we can learn from any experience they're having. It just makes a world of difference. I think it really changes gaming into a very positive outlook, a very positive output.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that. Just from like an education angle, I will tell my kids, you've built this awesome thing in Minecraft. Why don't you see if you can do your school project in it? right? And now the teachers are kind of like of our age and they know what the games can do. So my kids are doing, their school projects that they would have had to do some other traditional way, but they're doing it in a medium that they are already kind of expressing themselves. And they were showing I think they had to create like this climate change kind of sustainable town, and it was all done in Minecraft, and it was still hitting that criteria and the rubric of what you had to do, but within the video game, right? So they were kind of inspired, like, whoa, I can actually apply this to other things, right? So that I think is very important, and being intentional with games and where they kind of sit, and pushing them to push the boundaries themselves, right? Like, let's see how you can apply it elsewhere. And Trevor and I have kind of talked about like coding and, see if you can develop your own games and stuff. And I don't think we're quite there yet with our kids yet, but I think they can see that could be a possibility. Whereas myself growing up, my parents didn't know anything about games or even how long it would last. I thought they probably thought it was a phase. Well, hey, mom and dad, I'm doing a podcast about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Any year now, he'll stop. Any year now.
Yeah, exactly. Next year is our year. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of echo what Trevor said, and then add on those other, intentional areas where you can kind of think of and guide where gaming could apply, right? And then see what the kids can do, because they can surprise you what they can come up with.
And then, after 3 months of intentionally giving it our best efforts, Michael and I reconvened in early December of 2022 to recap what we have done, what we've learned, and what our plans are for the new year. We are back 3 months later, kind of working with our kids and exposing our kids to the world of video games, which of course is a fun experience, and I think for me also a little nerve-wracking as well, but we'll get into it. So we spoke about it very briefly before I hit the record button. You mentioned you had some goals in mind when we first kind of started on this journey. So kind of let's give like a quick recap as like, what was your intent or what was your expected result, and kind of where did you end up?
Yeah. So, the inspiration for the idea for the episode comes from this idea that, in having kids and them watching me play and wanting to play, and me trying to turn the controller over and them saying, what do I do? And me kind of just having this moment of reflection that, I was 4.5, 5 years old, I feel like, when we got our NES for Christmas. And I don't really ever remember being challenged by the like if I wanted to play a game, I had to sit down and learn it. Like there was stuff that our friends would share, but the concept of a side-scrolling Super Mario Brothers wasn't a difficult thing for me to overcome. And like, I was immediately drawn to gaming. Now my kids watch me game, they're immediately drawn based on that. But there was this idea that my daughter's turning 5, and that seems to be right about the right age to introduce. And I took an idea and said, hey, I have the Switch Lite. It's sitting here, and, turning it over to her and saying, this is now yours. Here are some games. And, I purchased games that would allow us to play together, but kind of just went with this idea that here's a moment in time that, like, I remember my first console, she'll remember hers, hopefully someday, and kind of go from there. And my idea is I will teach her how to play. Where that has come from where that has gone is much more interesting. Is she has kind of taken it as, this is my Switch. I am going to go play this. And she asks questions when she needs to. There's certain games that she likes to play, and other ones that she's not really interested in that I thought she would have more interest in. So it's kind of been unique, and I've been watching from like I wouldn't say like a helicopter parent, but I've been kind of just like monitoring, and I'll look over and see what she's doing, and she's playing Mario Kart 8 on her own, or she's playing Splatoon 3 on her own, or the one that I actually had to go and get because of reading was Peppa Pig, but it's voiced and acted by all the characters, and she's going through it, and she tells me exactly what she's doing on a single screen, and it's really interesting stuff. So that was not my goal, was to kind of teach her how to play. And I've kind of learned that like you kind of get to let them go, and they figure it out.
Letting them go was a big thing for me as well. I think I had the same idea, where sit with my son, show him how to play, where at the end of the day, for better or for worse, he kind of figured things out on his own. And one of the things I realized was, looking back like you did, when I started playing video games when I was 6 or 7, my parents didn't know what they were. They didn't.
Oh, yeah.
It was just this brick that they bought, at Bradley's in New Jersey, and hooked it up somehow, some way. I remember my dad struggling with connecting it, like, with the coax cable and the RF switch and all that stuff. And I distinctly remember just playing it myself. I remember playing Rad Racer and not knowing how to play. My first Nintendo did not have Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. I got a different type of set. It was like a control set, and it had no game but 2 controllers. And so they bought me Rad Racer and Black Box Baseball. I had no idea how to play Rad Racer. And I'm like, Daddy, can you help me? And he stared at it like, no, I can't. You gotta figure this thing out. So I discovered, and we're trying to teach, because we know they learn about games through watching us play. So I think letting them discover as well, I think, is really valuable, with a bit of guidance from us, which also I think leads to bonding moments and opportunities to just share time. It's kind of interesting you found yourself in a very similar situation.
Yeah, and I've sent you messages about this, but there were certain games that I thought, hey, you know what? Luigi's Mansion 3 has got a great multiplayer, and she seems to like these Pokemon cards. Now, the Pokemon cards, she likes the cards. She has no interest in the actual.
My son's the same thing.
So
yeah.
She just likes the pictures and what they are, and so that's kind of gone through. And I had gotten a copy of. I've tried to get into Pokemon several times, but she seems to like it, and I got her a copy of. I think I have Shield, she has Sword. And those 2 examples are games where I'm going to say right now is like just the reading that is involved in those games. She's 5. Typically kids, from what I understand, is they learn to read, 6, 7 years old. So I am surprised that Nintendo, which is a family oriented thing, has very little voice acting in their game. So reading is the main hurdle. So a game like Mario Kart, and a game like this Peppa Pig, where everything is voice acted. She also likes 51 Clubhouse games because they're very simple. She knows the games. And then have I said Mario Kart 8? Splatoon 3. Yep. Splatoon 3 is the one that has baffled me the most, because just 2 weeks ago, she went and grabbed her. She saw me playing. She went and grabbed her Switch. She turned it on. She got in the lobby. She found me, joined my game, and we launched. Like,
that's awesome.
Didn't have now. Okay, she's kind of a liability on my team. Don't tell her that. But once I hooked her up with the paint roller and all that stuff, yeah. I mean, she those are the things where she's doing that on her own. I showed her, and then there's kind of that part of it where I'm just like, okay, now because it's hers. It's not necessarily that I have to sit next to her. She just kind of comes and asks for help when she needs it. It's not really that it's like she's not using dad's stuff anymore. Yeah. Like, it's my Switch. So it's really cool. And I would actually prefer that she plays these games versus anything that's on those tablets that she has access to. I don't know if you've seen some of that stuff, but a lot of like the kids, like Amazon tablet stuff and things like that, are just gotcha games that don't have the ability to buy like the gems and stuff. So they're real simplistic stuff and like, point and click. But these things, I'm just impressed that she understands like the concept of like this. I have to beat this cup in Mario Kart. I have to get a gold trophy to move on. Like those types of things. Like, she's picking up on those things because there's very little there. Like, that concept of gaming. That's why I think the hurdle with the reading is like very different from when we grew up. Like, that concept's very clear in Mario Kart. Like, it's very easy to understand that there are 4 races and you have to do your best. And if you come out on the end, you get a gold trophy. all like Luigi's Mansion is like there's a whole side story that like I have to sit there and read. So, moving on, I will say that the one thing that I have kind of talked to the wife about is like, hey, this is a great way for her to learn how to read. Like, look at this dialogue, and she's putting some stuff together. She recognizes words now. She knows what lobby is. Like, she can spell it. So it's just it's stuff like that.
Have you noticed any roadblocks for your daughter as she's getting into the games? Any stumbling points like my son with running? Like, have you found anything that she's just like, once you get past this, once you learn this, and by the way, I can't teach you this. Like, I keep telling him, you gotta hit X and A and Y or B and Y, and I realize I'm getting frustrated. I cannot teach him this. He needs to learn it on his own. What about your daughter? Is there anything you're noticing?
So I would say the biggest one being anything with tutorials or reading. We tried Pokemon Snap, the new one.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very straightforward. You have a camera, you're taking pictures of Pokemon, but like the idea of taking those photos back to somebody to judge how your photos are, like that just goes over her head. Like that's not that part of it. She can't get past that. So like that objective isn't clear. Like, don't worry about Professor what's his name. Like, just take pictures, and she can't figure that out. Like Luigi's Mansion, I've talked about. Another one is so for Super Mario 3D World, that's one that we had tried. Me being better at platforming, that's a roadblock. She can't do what I can do. So then she's like, how do you do that? And you try to tell her that. Like the idea of, okay, so for platforming, this is the hurdle that I've seen. I think you were just alluding to it, is you have to be pressing on a directional input on which way you're going, also have a second button to be speeding up, and then hitting a jump button. Those three inputs occurring at the same time, she's not there yet. She doesn't have that. So that's a big hurdle. And then the control aspect of like all these buttons that they have. Like when we first started, I started with an NES. It had a D-pad and two buttons that it start and select. Now there's 4 face buttons, two analog sticks, which are also buttons, D-pads, and then you have the Switch, which is, it's not L1 and L2, it's R and ZR, which this got explained to me. I don't know if you know this, but it's ZR and ZL because the Z trigger on the N64. That's why
okay, interesting.
That's why they did it. So
interesting. That makes sense.
It makes sense, but then again, you're like, like hit the L button, then hit ZR, and it's like, which one is which? It's like, okay, great. They're both the same button. So I would say tutorial and the complexity of the controller is probably those two kind of intertwine. But then going with the controls, she does really well with the Switch Lite because it's tiny and it fits her hands and it has a D-pad and like all these little things, like the smaller, like less overwhelming part of it is it's just hers. Like she's just looking at her screen. She doesn't have to worry about being player 2 or anything like that.
It's interesting too. You talk about the obstacles and the goals, because a game like a Mario or even a Splatoon, it's a very clear objective. Splatoon, cover the area with as much ink or paint as you can. Mario, run right until you hit the flag. The fireworks go off. It's very clear you've won, etc. My son has a habit of, if he's not doing well, he goes back to levels he knows he can beat and just plays those over and over again. And I think he finds comfort in knowing I can beat this. It gets his self-esteem back a little bit. And we'll talk about that a little bit more elsewhere here. Have you found your daughter playing? You mentioned she'll play with you like in Splatoon. You jumped in on the lobby. One of the big things I heard from some of the conversations I had over the last couple of months was one of my guests, they really don't let their kids play by themselves. They always play with them in like a co-op environment. Initially he wanted to play by himself. He likes playing in handheld. He sits on the couch, he curls up, he's in his own little world. And I think that's good. I think it's cool for him to have that experience. But once I started playing with him more, it opened it up. It really opened the horizons to the point where, as you probably heard in the Zelda episode, hey, Daddy, let's play Link to the Past. Or even a big game for us, which I really think was the tipping point, was Shredder's Revenge. He kind of knew what a Ninja Turtle was. Now he loves Ninja Turtles, and he loves playing that game because we can play together. And I'm taking care of most of the enemies, but he's taking care of some himself, so he's getting that satisfaction of, putting a nunchuck to the head of a foot soldier robot, right? It's kind of violent, but it's just robots exploding. I don't see any harm in any of that stuff. It's not human beings, right? And playing co-op really opened it up for him, where he wants to play with us more and more. For example, my wife loves Mario World, like Super Mario World. She grew up with that game. She loves it. She's good at it, and we've been playing, 3-player Super Mario World. We sit on the couch, we pass the controller back and forth, and it's been a really fun experience because he progresses with us, he learns, and so that has been a real big game changer for us as far as games go. Using that not only as a time for him to play, but a time for us to just have that together time. It's been really useful. I'm not sure if you've had that same experience.
Yeah, I've so that kind of goes back to what I was originally saying. Was I was under the impression that it was going to be completely cooperative. Like that was how this was going to go.
Sure.
And that's kind of based off the kind of where the inspiration for the episode came from, was just she was showing active interest in it, and then when I would try to let her play, like it was just, we're in today's age, like there's so many games to play, she couldn't catch on. So kind of turning it over and saying, here's yours, is kind of open up. There's different types of games, and she knows this now. There's 1-player games. These are games that you play, as one person. There are also multiplayer games, like where, Mario Kart, we can play. I can play on my Switch, she can play on hers, or we can play on the same screen. But another thing that has kind of opened up, and this is an interesting one, is her sitting on the couch next to me while she plays and kind of asks for guidance in certain things.
Sure.
That's really been kind of the thing that has been different, or kind of like an eye-opening, is like she is working through certain stuff and she'll just sit there, and she only plays for like at most 30-40 minutes. That's about her peak, and she'll get to a point and she'll go, I think I'm done. And then that's it. And we work through like certain stages and go through it. She's not taking it and like disappearing in a room for 3 or 4 hours and coming back out and being like, I beat The Legend of Zelda. And I'm like, what? How did you do that? But she's getting this idea. And I think really what's been helping with that is that there are inputs that are just, it's repetition. It's not a, A is pretty much move forward. B is pretty much move back, in right. Like these menus. And every screen has a task. Like you're trying to, like, the idea of levels and worlds, those are old school terms, to this day. I think now people call them, what do they call them? Biomes, we're not really there yet, but like, that's been the thing, is like we were driving, right after her birthday, we were driving down and her cousin was visiting, and we played 3-person Mario Kart 8 in the car on 3 separate Switches, which is just like not something that had blown my mind as a kid. Like that's not something that you're supposed to be able to do. But she had a blast. And then, 2 days later, she was sitting on the couch next to me and trying to work through, how to play a certain game. And I just sat there and I was like, so what do you got to do here? And she's like, A. And I'm like, yep, A, and moving through it. And, I mean, I'm just kind of letting her go and finding the games that she likes, and that's where she's at. She does like the Super Mario game, but like the platforming stuff, it's not catching her. She's not understanding that hurdle. She has to get over it. It's not driving her, but there are other ones that once I've seen that she's kind of gravitated towards certain stuff, I just kind of let her keep going and going that way. But so I thought it was going to be all co-op, but a lot of it's just been guiding her through her single player experiences when she needs it. So that's where we're at.
I think with our last kind of 15 minutes and last bit of time here, I guess the question is what's next, right? What's next in your kids' journeys? Maybe what are you, this is going to be coming out right before the holidays. So, are there any Christmas gifts on the horizon for the little one? And yeah, I'm just curious where you are with this and what you hope to achieve as we kind of go forward.
I have all the gaming devices that are potentially needed. Like the idea of like them getting like an Xbox not happening because we already have one. So those
right.
So there's that. Switch being, by the time Miles is old enough, hopefully there's new Switch hardware for him of some kind, which will probably not be a Switch because it's Nintendo. It'll be something completely different. But I think the idea is it's just like, I think my biggest takeaway and the goal is to just allow them to play with me when it is necessary, or if we find something that we can all play together, like where they're actually engaged and having fun. But then also kind of like the biggest takeaway being from this thing is this is going to be the hard one, is because I'm like, if she gets into like JRPGs, I'm going to be like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. Like you're probably saving the world or something. But like using this as like kind of like I always like try to tell my parents, you brought this up way back in the beginning, but like they never knew. And I think that one of the things that I've taken away from gaming is like the ability to read. I know that like that's going to be something that she's going to have to learn to further her experience, and Miles will have to learn that too. And those are those pieces. But gaming and like decision making and that frustration piece and like all those things are things that I kind of want to just kind of like let them experience for themselves and kind of just keep passing my knowledge on from it. But like I hope that this is a long-term thing. I'm going to be okay if one of my kids says, I don't like video games. I'll be fine. I got plenty to play myself, and things like that. But
right.
Really what this whole thing has been about is, and I don't really know how to wrap this up in like an overall idea, but the title of the podcast is A Gamer Looks at 40. I'm turning 40 in March. And so I'm right on the cusp of like a gamer looks at 40 and a gamer looks back at 40. And it's kind of like the legacy piece is like your parents probably taught you something that you connect with them at. And then I'm looking at this as like, this is something that we will connect with. So that when someday somebody down the line or he down the line, somebody says, so what was your first console? Well, it was actually a Switch Lite and my dad got me into it. And this was the first game. And these are the first memories. This is a real long-term answer to your question, but like, that's kind of what this is this is just something of like passing on a legacy. Gaming is a big part of my life, and whether or not it's part of my kids' life, it's just me introducing them to it, And
yeah.
I use the example of like my dad. My dad was big into fishing. Like that's something that I still do with him, and that's just always kind of been his thing. So it's something that he introduced me to, and that's the only reason I know how to do it. So like I will take my kids fishing only because my dad showed me how to do it. So it's like those types of things where like you have this connection where this was really important to me. Whether the level of importance to you is up to you. However, this is going to be something that I introduce you to that you'll know how to do for the rest of your life. The benefits and things that come along with it, I've always said, are just there's like a lot of things in games that, how do I say this? Do you ever have somebody ask you like, what's a good educational game? And you're like, not an educational game. Like I always tell them, like, if you really want to learn something, like play like Minecraft or play Animal Crossing. Try to run a town. Like
right.
Those types of things. Those are educational decision making pieces. Like those are the long term things that I hope to instill in them. Is that like there are positives to this hobby. Everybody gets their own little piece out of it, but at the end of the day, it's just really just a connection piece. That someday we'll look back and she'll open a box where she'll look down and there'll be this dusty old Switch Lite with and she'll go, oh yeah, remember this?
Uh-huh.
She'll also have the Xbox Series 1X, which came out on her birthday, which I managed to find a Project Scorpio edition of that has her birthday on it. So
okay, she'll
have that. Miles doesn't get anything that cool. November 7th, 2017. That was the day they released it. So
right on. That's cool. I think for me, and I think you hit on something very, very true, is exposure and introduction. I think one of the main joys of parenthood for me is the excitement of what is my son going to be into.
Yep.
What is he going to gravitate towards? Is he going to be Is he going to stick with swimming? And that we just try to expose him to as much stuff as possible. There's only a limited amount of time in the week. He can't be doing a different extracurricular activity every day. They're also very expensive, right?
Yep.
But, hey, here's swimming. Do you like this? Are you excited to go? Cool. Hey, here's taekwondo. Are you excited to go? Yes? Cool. He knows, and there's been days where he's like, I don't want to go to taekwondo today. And we're driving there. And I'm like, why don't you? And he's like, I just want to stay home. I'm like, are you just not into it anymore? And because in an attempt to stay home, he's like, I don't like it anymore. I'm like, well, that's fine. If you don't like taekwondo, you don't have to go, but you have to do something. Like, you are not going to just sit around and do nothing. Then we were thinking about putting you into gymnastics or whatever else, right? So video games are just another thing I'm trying to expose him to because it's something I enjoy. And he showed an interest in, like we talked about 3 months ago. They showed an interest. You're like, hey, do you want to check this out? Try a game, sit with me while I play. And now it's your turn to play. So I think he really loves it. And I think it's something he will continue with. But who knows? That may be a thing that ends around 9 or 10. And then he discovers something else. And I think my role is to, try to make sure he's enjoying it in a responsible manner. For me, which is with some time limits, with some screen time limits, teach him and show him it's okay to lose and it's okay to fail. Again, so long as you learn from that failure and realize that if you do make a mistake or mess up, you as a person are not diminished. You are not less of a person. You are still you. You are still brave and strong and courageous and up and all the things. And that core needs to stay intact because that's a thing that's going to carry with him. I don't want him talking to some therapist when he's 28, like, oh, every time I fail, I'm a miserable person. He'll just talk to therapy. He'll talk to a therapist about other things.
My dad introduced me to Dark Souls.
Yeah, right.
He told me I had to beat it. No, that's not what's happening here.
Yeah. I went through Dad's DVD collection. I found this thing called Reanimator, and it scarred me for life. So, why is RoboCop? I thought RoboCop is just about a robotic police officer. I didn't realize.
I'm not even sure my kids would know what to do with the DVD.
I don't think so. He's seen them. He knows. He has seen them. And I think he's aware of how they kind of sort of work, but I don't think he's got a full grasp. Just to kind of put a bow on it, for myself, my next few months is going to be utilizing games for basically two things. One to kind of connect us as a family and create more family time. Mm-hmm. And when you listen back on this episode, Dan from Retrologic had a couple of really good suggestions for games that are excellent family games that we can play as a foursome when my daughter's old enough to actually play it, or even just as a threesome. And two, hope that through his experience of trying and failing at Donkey Kong Country again, I mean, come on, dude.
Are you talking Donkey Kong Country like SNES?
SNES.
Oh man. Okay. All right. So 16-bit platforming. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah,
stuff.
and that's what he loves it because he likes the fun monkeys and Diddy Kong dances, and he likes the little animals you play as, and it's cool. As he kind of comes up against this friction, understand that friction is a good thing, challenge is a good thing, and the joy that you get when you break through and win, which he has experienced at this point, it makes that friction worth it. And to hopefully help him realize, again, failure is okay as long as you learn. And those, I guess, are my two, I guess the two tent poles or the two goals I'm going to try shoot for this coming year, and see if he sticks with it. Maybe he won't, like you said.
Yeah, I think obviously I think she will stick with it. She seems to enjoy it, but I think a big piece of what you're talking about is just kind of like knowing when to pivot, kind of trying to instill like knowing when to pivot when that frustration is becoming a negative. Like, okay, so you're not into this. Like, this isn't your type of game. And trying to like embrace that you clearly accept the challenge of this game and you want to overcome it. This is your game. Like, this is what you're into. Like I made a joke earlier, but like for me, if they got into like JRPGs and stuff, I'd be like, oh, I'm so outside my element here, but I'd have to support it because that's their thing, like, and that's the thing is like, let them have their own path and make sure they know that you'll know when you're into a game, because that frustration piece, that God, I can't believe I lost there. All right, let me try again. That's video games in a nutshell. Is like, why are we still doing this to ourselves? Why are we still suffering through this? Because it's fun.
Just a quick addendum to the episode. A few days ago, my son was playing New Super Mario Bros. Wii U on the Switch, and he's now at the end of World 2. He was at Morton's Castle, and he made it all the way there by himself. No help from anybody, really. And I realized that's where he's at, so I sit down next to him and I'm watching him play, and he's getting through the castle. He understands what to do, but he's at the point where he's too excited. Like, he's too excited to the point where he's making dumb mistakes, like easy mistakes. We've all been there, especially with a platformer. We've all been there. We've all done that before. So I say to him, look, I want you to beat this guy. You've clearly mastered this area, this dungeon. I will get you back to Morton if you want. And he, at first, agreed. He was like, okay, Daddy. So every time he dies, I take him through the castle really fast, and he'd be like, wow, how'd you triple jump? Like all that. And I'd take him to Morton, and every time he played it, he did a little better. And then after a while, he said, no, Daddy, I want to do it myself. I want to get there myself. So I did. And finally, he was on his literal last life. I promise you, it was his last life. He was fully powered up with the freeze ball. He's taken on Morton. He's got it figured out. The patterns figured out. He then gets crazy. He gets too crazy. He makes two silly mistakes. Back down to little Mario. And he beat him. He hit him with the third stomp, and that was it. And the look of joy and astonishment and accomplishment on his face, I'd never seen that on his face. He does swim and taekwondo and other kind of social stuff, and he'll walk away happy or proud he did a good kick or had a good lap, but that look of just satisfaction was, if I had a mental camera, I would have snapped 100 pictures. And I guess I do, but I can't share those. And to me, that was the win I needed. That was the win for him, and really a win for me. After 3 months of Michael and I going through this process, talking to people, and being intentional on how we introduce games to our kids. I'm thinking about, and as I look back on it, all I can think about is how I felt when I was his age, when I did the same thing. And hopefully you are as well. Because that is what this show is all about. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you've made it this far, you probably have already done all the podcast things. If not, please do so. There's a link tree in my Twitter bio, as well as the body of this podcast post. Please just do the things, and I would be greatly appreciative. Happy holidays, and until next time, continue being awesome.